Hello, students. Let's get our words for roots week 1. In quarter 1 and quarter 2, you'll be learning all different types of Greek roots, prefixes, and suffixes that are going to help you expand your vocabulary enormously. So today we're going to quickly review what word roots are. We're going to review prefixes and suffixes, and then you're going to be taking notes on your roots for this week. At any time during this video, you can pause it to take time to write down what you need. You can always go back and rewatch the video, and if you would prefer just to look at the PowerPoint rather than watching the video, you can always go and pull up the PowerPoint by going to our School Fusion page, going to our class files, and going to the vocabulary folder. Let's begin. First of all, a word root is what it sounds like. It's the part of the word that carries its meaning. A good way to think of a root is to think of a tree or a plant. After all, a tree has roots, and a tree grows up from the roots and it has leaves. So you can think of one root creating multiple different words. So it's the core part of the word that carries meaning. Remember, you can pause if I go too quickly for you. Here's an example. The root ped and pod, both of those mean foot. So you see this word in several different places that are related to feet. So for example, a podiatrist is a person who deals with feet. If you get an ingrown toenail or you have something funky going on with your feet, you're going to go see a podiatrist. A pedestrian, that's somebody who walks. Again, you see the PED root here. Pedicure, nice and relaxing, taking care of your feet. And pedometer, something that measures the number of steps that you take. Of course, when you step, you use your feet. So all of these use the roots. However, you have to be careful with roots because they aren't 100% foolproof. They can be very helpful, but they don't always work. So you're always going to want to make sure to look at the context clues of the sentence. Look at what's around the word. Does it make sense for it to relate to feet? Here's a classic example. The word pediatrician. It has the letters PED. So when you first glance at this, you might suspect that a pediatrician, like a podiatrist, has something to do with feet. In this case, you would be incorrect because after all, as we all know, a pediatrician is a doctor who cares for kids. So please remember, roots are not foolproof. Just because you see the 3 letters doesn't necessarily mean that the word uses the root. So always look at context clues. So this word actually uses a different root. Pediatrician uses paid or pais, which means child. So always be careful. A prefix, this is when you have the root or word parts added to the beginning of some words to change their meaning. The word prefix has a prefix in it, pre, okay, which means to fix before. So let's look at some examples. Prearrange, to arrange before. Prehistoric, before history. Precondition, so something that you have to have in order for the condition to be valid or for something to happen. And pre-conscious, so before you are aware of something. So even if you had never seen, for example, pre-conscious before, if you knew that the root pre meant before, you could probably figure it out using your knowledge of the root and the context clues in the sentence, so the way the word was used. Again, a reminder, they're not foolproof. For example, the word pretty, it starts with PRE, but as you know, has nothing to do with before, right? We use pretty to describe someone who we think is attractive. So just be aware that you need to always look at context. A suffix, on the other hand, if prefixes go at the beginning, suffixes go at the end. You are correct. A suffix is a letter or groups of letters that are added to the end of the word. We'll go into greater depth with suffixes in second quarter or at the end of first quarter, but for now, it's just important that you know that suffixes almost always change the part of speech. So they take a word that may be a noun and maybe turn it into an adjective, or take a word that might be an adjective and turn it into an adverb. Let's look at an example so you can see some of what I am looking at. Here we go. So the word sensation, that's a noun, okay? It's a thing, and it's a feeling caused by the stimulation of a sense organ. But if I change the group of letters at the end of that word, I can change it to different parts of speech that have related meanings. I can use them in different ways in my sentences. So if I wanted to take sensation and I wanted to describe someone who perceive sensations very easily, I would describe them not as sensation. I wouldn't say the sensation student. I would say the sensitive student. So you can see how the suffixes are in bold. They're capable of changing the part of speech. So sensation can go from sensitive, which is an adjective, sentiment, which is a noun. That's an attitude or a thought prompted by feeling. Sentimental, adjective, something that results from feeling rather than thinking through something. Senseless, which is also an adjective, lacking sense. Sensitize, which is a verb. That's when you make someone sensitive to something so that they can perceive it and they're aware of it. Sensor is another noun. It's a device that responds to some type of sensory stimulation. Sensory, it's an adjective relating to sensation or the senses. And sensational, it's an adjective arousing a quick, intense emotional reaction. You don't need to copy down this chart into your notes, but for now, this is a good example of the way suffixes will work. Let's get our roots. So in your notes, you might want to put a heading that says Roots Week 1. And every week you will get 10 roots, and you will be watching a video and getting notes before you come to class. And then when you arrive in class on Monday, your warm-up will be on those roots that you took notes on. If you have your notes, you'll be able to use them on the warm-up, and they will be graded for correctness. So it's very important, as you can see, that you do your homework, that you write down these notes. Since we have not set up our binders yet, I recommend that you write these notes on a loose leaf sheet of paper. That way we can put them in the vocabulary section of your binder when we set up your binders a little bit later in class. So our first root is A, AB, ABS. Let's look at some words that use the root, and then we'll try and infer what the root might mean. So Jamie was absent from class. The monks abjure all worldly pleasures when they take their vows of poverty. The vegetarian abstained from eating meat. Well, if you're absent, absent means to be away from. When you abjure something, you give up something that you once believed in. And when you abstain, you choose not to do something or have something. So when you look at all these words, take a minute. What do you think AAB, ABS might mean? You're right. It means away or from. Okay, and you can see how all these words relate to that. In your notes, I do recommend that you write down the example words, absent, abjure, abstained, but you're not required to write down the definition. You are required to write down the root itself and the root's definition. That is what I will be checking for when I check your homework in class. So please don't feel overwhelmed at the amount of text on each slide. If it helps you to write everything out, by all means, go ahead and pause and do that, but it's not required. You simply need the root and the definition. Root number 2. This one is rather lengthy. There are several forms of this root, but the one that we're going to primarily focus on in class is going to be the root AD. But I do want you to be aware of the other forms that do exist. So when you write this in your notes, make sure you underline or highlight AD, but I do want you to write down these roots. So let's look at some words. I was so mad, gum adhered to my new shoes. The birds adapted to the warmer climate. I adulterated the recipe by adding more water since I was out of oil. Let's look at the definitions for each of the words and see if we can infer or make an educated guess about what the root might mean. Adhere. When you adhere something, you stick it to something, like taping something up. It has adhesive on the back. The birds adapted to the warmer climate. When you adapt, you change in response to something. And when you adulterate something, you lessen the quality of it by adding inferior elements. Most of you are probably more familiar with the word adultery, which we use to refer to infidelity in marriage or somebody stepping out on their significant other. Take a minute. What do you think AD might mean? AD means to or toward. To or toward. Root number 3, by or bis. Depending on which language you're in, it might also be pronounced bice. Let's look at some words. I love riding my bicycle to the park. We have bi-weekly vocabulary quizzes. The median strip bisects the highway. What do you think bi or bice or bis means? Bicycle has 2 wheels. If it's bi-weekly, it's happening every 2 weeks. And if you bisect, you're cutting something in two, or you're cutting it in half. So bi must mean, you guessed it, all these definitions, what do they have in common? The word two. Bi or bice or bis means two. Number 4, circum. The circumference of a standard NBA basketball is 29.5 inches. The expert thief found it easy to circumvent the security system. My dog was unhappy when we circumscribed her play area by putting up a fence. Let's look at the definitions of each of these words. Circumference, that is the distance around something. And you probably know how to do that from math class. And if you don't know it yet, I'm sure you'll be learning it this year. To circumvent, so the expert thief found it easy to go around the security system, circumvent. My dog was unhappy when we put a boundary around her play area. So circumscribed is to put a boundary around. Now, if you look at each of these definitions, what do they have in common? You are correct. Circum means around. Around. Root 5, calm or cone. Now, if you speak Spanish, or if you know a little Spanish, you probably have a good clue as to what this root's going to mean, but let's look at some examples. The combination of yellow and blue creates green. We had a long conversation about politics. Once I connect the power source, the lamp will work. Now, you should be familiar with all of these words and their definitions, but let's look more closely at them. When you combine, what are you doing? You're mixing or bringing items together. When you have a conversation, you have 2 or more people talking together. And when you connect, you bring 2 things together. So, what does comb or cone mean? And if you speak Spanish, you know what cone means in Spanish. It means with. So, your definition for this root is comb or con, together or with. Don't forget, you can pause at any point if I'm moving too quickly. So don't be afraid to pause and then hit play when you're ready. Root number 6, DE. This root is actually in my last name. So let's see what we have. Missing assignments will detract points from your grade. The weary sailors debarked from the boat after the long voyage. The bananas were brown with decay. When you detract something, if you're missing an assignment, obviously that's going to take away points from your grade. If the weary sailors have just finished a long voyage, they're going to be getting off the boat. So to debark is to get off of something. The bananas were brown with decay. When something decays, it rots or spoils. like milk can decay and it'll rot and spoil. DE means off, from, opposite. And I don't have this on the slide, but it can also mean of in some cases. Okay, so off, from, or opposite. So my last name, D. Dominicis, the DE at the beginning means from or of, and my last name literally means of the little houses, as it's written. My last name actually comes from the root domine, which has to do with house of God. My family at one point had an ancient, way back in the Renaissance, we had a bishop in Italy, and that's where my name stems from, is house of God, and then now it means little houses. Number 7, dis, diff, or die. Dis, diff, or die. Zach and Zeke are fraternal twins, so they still look different. The partygoers all dispersed when Alana's parents came home early. I diverged from my normal commute because traffic was so bad. So again, different, I realize that I'm sure you all know what that means. Different means not the same or separate. If all the partygoers disperse, that means they scatter, they move apart because they don't want to get in trouble. I diverged from my normal commute. We do this pretty frequently in this area with 95. If you diverge, you break off and you go in another direction. If you've seen the movie Divergent or read the book, you're probably familiar with this word. The main character is called Divergent because she breaks off. She doesn't fit into any one of her society's groups. Great book, check it out. So what does dis, diff, and die mean? It means apart or not. And yes, anytime you have multiple roots, you will be required to know what all of them mean on your assessments. So make sure again that you're writing all of them down. Almost done. 2 more. Epi. Let's look at some examples. The Louisa County High School was near the epicenter of the quake. If you remember that, it happened in August a few years ago. The author provided an epilogue to tell us what happened later. Your epiglottis keeps you from breathing in and choking on your food. Probably pretty important. Let's look at the definitions and see what they have in common. Epicenter. An epicenter of an earthquake is a spot on the surface that indicates where the earthquake or the rupture started below the earth. So it's on top of the soil or on top of the map that indicates where the rupture happened below. An epilogue is a bonus chapter or a section added on to the formal ending of a book. It usually tells you what happened later, if the author thinks readers would want to know. A good example of this is if you've read the Harry Potter book, at the end there's an epilogue that shows Harry and Hermione and Ron as adults. That's a good example. And last but not least, epiglottis. That's the cartilage that sits on the top of the back of your tongue. So if you open your mouth really wide, you might be able to see it. That's your epiglottis, and it's on top of. So what do all these definitions have in common? You're right, they all have on to, and that's what epi means. It means upon or on top of something. Upon or on top of something. Number 9, equi. The level-headed athlete faced successes and setbacks with equanimity. Women in business are shattering the glass ceiling and demanding equitable pay. I learned about equilateral triangles in geometry class yesterday. Now, I bet you can guess what this means, but let's look at how these words use the root to create their definitions. If you do something with equanimity, that means that you have evenness of temper, like nothing ruffles you, you stay calm, cool, collected. The context clue in this word would have been level-headed. All right, the glass ceiling, if you're not familiar with that term, that's traditionally women have had a hard time breaking into positions in upper management in companies, so that's what this sentence is about. So equitable means fair and impartial. It means that women get paid the same as men. And last but not least, you should know this one, an equilateral triangle. It's a triangle when all the sides are the same length. So what does equi mean? You got it. It means equal. And last but not least, our last root for week 1, X and the letter E. So the first example, the coach was ejected from the game after picking a fight with the referee. It is important to know where the exits are located in case of a fire. I extended my hand to the elderly gentleman to help him on the bus. So we've all seen this in a game. A coach gets a little hot-headed and unsportsmanlike, and he or she's ejected. That's when you force or throw somebody out in a sudden way. If you're going out of an exit, you're going out, a way out. And if you extend your hand, or if you extend an offer, that means you're holding out towards someone. It can also mean to draw something out to make it longer or wider. So this one's pretty easy. What do you think EX or E means? You are correct. EX and E means out, from, or forth. Okay, out, from, or forth. That concludes your roots for this week. Again, make sure that this is labeled on a sheet of paper, and you should put this sheet of paper in your binder. And when we organize your binder, this will go in the vocabulary section of your binder. You can read through these once or twice before you come to class. And Monday morning, you will need this to do your warm-up. I'll see you then. Have a nice weekend, guys. Bye-bye.